In this recording, we're going to look at problem 6. Problem 6 fits into this part of the chapter. It's part of the cost of the asset. Well, here's the real big issue. As I've said earlier, if all of this time takes place here and we start using the asset at this point in time. Previously I've said, about all of the costs, most of the costs, if not all of them, incurred during this period of time will get capitalized as a cost of the asset. Again, unless it's from an inefficiency or something that wasn't necessary to do. So here's the question. What if we borrow money? What if we're constructing a building and we borrow money? During this time period, should the interest costs be capitalized? Well, the FASB deliberated over that for a while and decided, yes, we should. So they have very defined rules on how much of the interest cost should be capitalized and how much should be expensed during the construction period. So here's the criteria. You have to have 3 things going on. We have to be having expenditures, so that's during the construction period. Activities are in progress to get the asset ready for its intended use, but we haven't started using it yet. And interest is being incurred. And if you want to take a peek, there's some pages in your textbook that'll fine-tune the actual rules. Okay, so let's skip forward to problem 6. Here we go. So Great Landscaping began construction of a new plant on December 1, 2014. On this date, the company purchased a parcel of land for $139,000 in cash. It paid $2,000 for surveying, $4,000 for a title insurance policy. An old building on the premise was demolished and it cost $3,000, but we got $1,000 back from sale of the materials. I hope you recognize these are all costs of acquiring the land and getting the land ready for construction. So if I jump forward, we're going to see all of those costs that I just mentioned, the 139, the 2, blah, 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 all the way down to the salvage, which is a negative. That's actually a receipt, so it reduces the cost. There's the money spent on the land. Okay, so that was that $147,000 for the land. Now, also in December, we paid architecture fees of $30,000 and a building permit for $3,000. Now, this paragraph has to do with expenditures for the building. So I've scheduled those out over here. In December in 2014, we spent $33,000 on the building. Other information, it's going to tell us there were these expenditures in 2015. In 2014, they borrowed $600,000 at 8%. Okay, so how are we going to figure out how much interest do we capitalize? Well, first off, we have to arrive at a weighted average accumulated expenditures. Now in 2014, you're going to think it's kind of silly that we bother with this, but this problem kind of illustrates weighted average, and you're going to see probably wouldn't really have mattered if we did this, but when we get to 2015, it'll make a difference. So anyhow, we list the $147,000 for the land, and then these two $30,000 and $3,000 for the building. So those occurred on December 1. So those expenditures only covered 1/12 of a year. Those took place at the beginning of December, so those had value for 1 month out of the year. So, we take the $147,000 times 1/12 and we get this weighted average and accumulated expenditures. Okay, so now that we've got that $15,000, how much will we capitalize? Well, here's the rule. We're going to capitalize the lower of the actual interest cost incurred during the period or the avoidable interest. And as you can imagine, the avoidable interest is just the interest savings or the interest cost we would have avoided if we hadn't constructed this building and borrowed money. So if we hadn't constructed the building and borrowed money, how much interest would we have saved? Okay, so let's go to the avoidable interest. So here's our weighted average expenditures, $15,000 at an 8% rate, $1,200. So we could have avoided $1,200 if we hadn't expended this money and borrowed money for that. So for a year, and by the way, we put this on an annual, $15,000 is a weighted average for a year because its interest rate is an annual interest rate. Could have done this a little bit different, but this is how your textbook illustrates it, so I'm going to go with it as well. Again, this is annualized because this interest rate is annualized. Now the actual interest rate, well, let's go back. We actually borrowed $600,000. And I see I have a typo here. This, instead of 680, that should be $600,000. At 8% for 1 month is $4,000. So we choose the lower, that's the avoidable interest, the $1,200, and then anything in addition will get capitalized as interest. So the $4,000 cash paid, we're going to capitalize $1,200 of it as the building, and $2,800 of it will be expensed. So let's do that. So let's review. December 1, we paid cash for land. Remember, that was $147,000. And we also had expenditures for the building. I'm just going to abbreviate building. Go back and take a peek where I got those. So there's our $147,000 and our $33,000. So we've recorded those. Now December 31st, we're going to record this $4,000, capitalize $1,200 of it, and expense the other $2,800. So on December 31st, we're going to have interest. I'll just abbreviate that with an I. So interest expense. That was the $2,800. We will capitalize the $1,200. I'll record that as building. And then cash will go out, or it could have been interest payable. One of those two accounts would have been credited, and they don't really tell us whether it was cash paid right away or they accrued it as a payable. Okay, now when we go forward to 2015, we've got a couple things going with this. First off, these expenditures for 2014 will go forward to 2015 because we are looking at accumulated expenditures over the construction period. So that $180,000, we can see it coming in here from 2014. Also, the $1,200, right? Oops, sorry about that. So we capitalize this $1,200, and that's coming in as well. So from 2014, we actually have construction expenditures and the capitalized interest coming in. Okay, now in 2015, they finished the job on July 1. So there really were only 6 months of expenditures. So the 2014, we had those existed for 6 months out of 12. On March 1, those existed for 4 months. That would be March, April, May, and June. That's 4 months. March, April, May, and June. 4 months out of a year. The $330,000 was on that. Those occurred on May, so May and June only 2 months. And the last, the $60,000, occurred on July, 0 months. Let's go take a quick peek, just in case you've forgotten where I got those numbers. So here is what happened in 2015. So I'm just showing these expenditures. Okay, so we do the same thing. We take the expenditure times the fraction, and we get the weighted average. We add those up, and here's our cumulated weighted average. So the avoidable interest is that weighted average expenditure, annual rate of 8%. The avoidable interest is $18,048. Our actual interest, remember we borrowed $600,000 at 8%. This would be for a whole year, $48,000. So we choose the lower, which is the $18,000. We'll capitalize that and expense the $29,952. Okay, let's go do journal entries. First off, we're going to have a journal entry for these three right here. So for the first 6 months, on March 1, we had a $240,000 expenditure. So we capitalize that, construction costs in the building. And then on May 1, we had $330,000. And then on July 1, we spent $60,000 on construction, and we capitalized all of that because we're not using the building yet. Then we finished construction on July 1 through December 31st, our interest. Actually, I think I said that wrong, don't I? That's actually January 1. January 1 through December 31st, the idea of interest. So let's see, what did I say? We're going to capitalize $18,048. So $18,048. We will expense $29,952. And then the total cash paid or accrued as a payable is $48,000. Now, let's also assume the asset has a 30-year life. What's the depreciation? Well, I need to know the cost. So we're going to go to this. So I need to know the cost. So let's go back. I haven't been posting things. Let's go back to our 2014 entries. Let's go post this to the land and the building and the building. So let's do that for 2014. Let's go back and post those. So we had $147,000 for land. In the building, we had $33,000 and $1,200. So $34,200. So when we go up here for 2014, the balance in the land account, $147,000. The balance in the building, $34,200. We're not using the building yet, so there's no accumulated. And then interest expense, let's go look at that journal entry. We expensed $2,800. So interest expense, $2,800. Now let's go to 2015 and let's post those journal entries. Okay, so I'm just going to, this 240, 330, and 60, and 18048, I'm going to go put all of those in the building account. So, 240,000. 330,000 for 2015, 60,000, and then we capitalize interest of 18,048. Okay, if I add, starting with my balance of 34.2, add all of these up, I get 682,248. Nothing happened to the land in 2015. So the land still has $147,000 balance. Cost hasn't changed. The building has a balance of $682,248. And let's go figure out our depreciation then. So if it's a 30-year life, we had a cost of $682,248. We want to divide by 30 years. But this only had, remember, it was only outstanding for half a year, right? We didn't start using it until July 1. So the depreciation expense will be for half a year over 30 years. And that's going to turn out to be $11,371. Okay, so our depreciation expense, $11,371. Okay, let's go back, put that on our chart. Put it in as a negative. And then interest expense, I have forgotten. Let's go take a peek. For 2015, interest expense was this $29,952. And I could post that $11,371 into the accumulated depreciation, and we're done. Okay, so that goes through how to calculate those accumulated, weighted average accumulated expenditures, how to arrive at avoidable interest, actual interest, and choose the amount that we'll capitalize.